This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Having concluded his visit to Germany, Chinese Premier Li Qiang has arrived in Paris for the second leg of his European tour. This is his first foreign trip since he took office in March as Chinese premier, a trip widely believed to help push China-Europe ties in the right direction. What are the impacts of Europe de-risking with China? What are the views of European business leaders on engagement with China? And how are Berlin and Paris dealing with China with constant pressure from Washington? To discuss these issues and more, I'm glad to be joined today by Professor Joav Toker at the American Graduate School in Paris, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, founder and president of the Schiller Institute, and Cui Hongjian, director of the Department for European Studies at China Institute of International Studies. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to Dialogue. Helga, I will start with you. So this is Premier Li's first trip overseas. He chose the two important European countries, Germany and France, for his destination. So tell us, what's the significance? What do you make of this tour?
Well, let me tell you that I'm quite relieved because obviously this visit took place in a very tense environment with, as you mentioned already, Washington pushing in the direction of decoupling. Ursula von der Leyen has chosen the word de-risking for essentially the same policy. So therefore, I think that the intergovernmental consultations between China and Germany went very well, given this environment. So I'm very happy. And I think the message of Prime Minister Li Qiang, I'm probably pronouncing it wrongly, got across that the business should be put in the driver's seat because they understand much better what is the real interest of Germany than other institutions, including the government, the intelligence services, the media, and so forth. So I think it went quite well, and no major clashes occurred, no provocations occurred. I think it was a calm, harmonious development, stressing the importance of the relations among these two very important economies of the world. So I think that my initial reading of it is much better than the worst expectations could have feared. Not as perfect as it could be. I think still there is tons of room for improvement because Germany, which is right now in a real big crisis because it's faced with deindustrialization. And the only way for Germany out is to strengthen the relationship with China. And I think Prime Minister Li's point that the biggest risk is a lack of development is so true for Germany, because Germany used to be a powerhouse of economic, science and technology and so forth. And that has been really attacked in the recent period by all kinds of policies, the sanctions policy, the sabotage of Nord Stream pipelines, all of these things. So I think for Germany right now, the strengthening of relationship with China is the absolute most important factor.
Mm-hmm. Hongjian, given this background, as Helga mentioned, almost like a new Cold War, Washington is having with Beijing containment policy, or they say the retreat of globalization. So this is intergovernmental dialogue between China and Germany, of course, between China and the European Union is even more important in the sense.
Yes, certainly. As we know, recent years, especially from European side, there are some more suspicions about its relations with China, even on some principles of, as we know, the win-win cooperation and the equal, respect to the equally and some other. As we know, in the background of the lower and the lower, especially the mutual trust, and also worse and worse perception from a European side on China. So now, as we know now, it's a very important opportunity for Chinese government to provide some more, as we know, messages, some more informations to help European side to understand more and also comprehensively about the Chinese policy, Chinese real population, on every, also every important issues, including the Chinese economy. China will insist its policy of opening up and reform or not. And China will be another hegemony after the United States, or China will try to uphold the United Nations Charter, everything. So I think now it's a very good opportunity for Premier Li and his delegation to visit Germany and France. As we know, these two major member states and also two major partners of China in Europe, to understand what's the real, thinking from China, and what's the real, perception from China on its relations with European countries. Of course, as we know, now it's not an easy job for Premier Li and also for Chinese government to convince European side that China will continue its policy on especially the economic cooperation and the opening market. But I think it must be the very, very important first step for Chinese side to get some more, understanding and also more trust from its European partners.
So, Professor Toker, I wonder what's the European perception about this trip? But certainly it increases, I said, as Hongjian pointed out, understanding or confidence building even among the two sides?
Well, the overall European perspective and the French one, for that extent, and the German one to a lesser extent, are valid regarding the points which my colleagues have already mentioned, that's for sure. But there is an elephant in the room of which the definition hasn't been mentioned yet, and we should. And this is obviously the geostrategic situation and the war. There's a war taking place about an hour and a half flight time from the studios. I'm speaking to you, and my colleague in Berlin is speaking to you. Now, look at the map. Perhaps these things are not as clear cut when you look at it through a Chinese or an American perspective. But the fact that the war is taking place for a year and a half now almost had altered so many things which were valid in the overall triangular relations between China, the United States and the EU, with or without Britain at a time, right? These days, the economic issues, the elements which are related to energy, to industrialization, to fighting inflation, to standards of living, and so many extremely important factors are to a large extent conditioned to what is happening geostrategically over the battlefields in Ukraine. Now, this is why, of course, the major attention of European policy makers, let them be of economic or political or military specialization, are through the projectors of what's happening there. And therefore, the position of China in this triangular situation in the context of the war is extremely important. And this is the first question European leaders put to you when you aboard with them topics related to the relations between China and the EU. Where does China stand over this major conflict, which is, reminding you, the very first war we're having on European soil for almost 80 years?
Yes, Professor Toker, of course, the Chinese side has offered, like 12-point peace proposal, offered to mediate, the different parties to reach a consensus, either a peace agreement or ceasefire. And China has said publicly, of being against the use of nuclear weapons. That's also welcomed in the European continent. In a sense, China is doing what it can, right, to help. But what's the final solution, for example, for the European Union in terms of the war? I mean, what they are expecting China to do in that sense?
well, what they are expecting China to do would probably be a very clear-cut sort of distinction between the positions of China and a support to the aggressor. The aggression was a Russian aggression, right? These were the Russians very clearly who crossed the border into Ukraine and are engaged in an aggression war. To the best of my knowledge, the Chinese have never officially accepted, acknowledged this state of situation. The Europeans, who are united to a degree which is practically unprecedented over many decades, are actually pointing at the major responsibility of Moscow in this conflict. And not to speak about the way the conflict is taking place and the accusations regarding war crimes and even crimes against humanity, which are associated with the way the war is being handled by the Russian army and militia, etc. So the Europeans would expect a clear-cut engagement of China to recognize who the aggressor is and to make sure there's no Chinese support, neither diplomatic nor military, in terms of the war effort of the Russian. This is essential for the Europeans, not only regarding the way the conflict is taking place right now in present time, but in terms of the overall new world which will emerge once the war is over. Hopefully it's over soon, although it doesn't look as if it's over soon, but this will shape the perimeter of the new interblock situation in the world regarding the very same triangle I was talking about, which is America, EU, Asia, China.
Well, Helga, slightly related to that issue, China is not alone in, let's say, holding that position of a neutral position in terms of the war. And China is not supplying weapons to either side of the war. And China is among more than 140 countries basically holding the same attitudes toward the war. I mean, slightly different from the European Union. This is not a war like between Russia and the European Union. This is a war, let's say, okay, directly Russia, Ukraine. And so, as you pointed out, the Chinese side, Premier Li mentioned clearly, the lack of cooperation or the lack of development probably is a risk, is a danger facing the nations here. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that the Chinese position on the Ukraine war is the only reasonable one, because I think the biggest danger right now to world peace would be that the world is falling in two separate blocks. Former President Mahathir of Malaysia has warned that this would lead for sure to a world war. And therefore, I think, the European Union right now is basically, under the influence of Washington and Great Britain, London, and that is the reason why they are sometimes saying things which are not really in the interest of Europe. Europe must have back peace. And the only way we get back peace is that China comes with a 12th principle proposal which elevates the whole conflict to a level where a solution is possible. And frankly, I think, the only way how the people of Ukraine can be helped is a ceasefire now, because any continuation of the fighting will just lead to more deaths, to more suffering, to more destruction of the Ukrainian economy. And I think, Europe would do well to take up the Chinese proposal. And, if you want to reconstruct Ukraine, it would be very easy in the context of the Belt and Road Initiative, where Ukraine has a historical position as a bridge. It could, because of its eastern parts, which is pro-Russian, and its western part, which is more pro-European. If Ukraine would be integrated in the Belt and Road Initiative, I think there would be a very positive future possible. And I think you are absolutely right that the majority of the global South countries do not agree with the US-British view of what was the cause of this conflict. And there are even many Americans who say that this was not only the fault of Russia, it was equally the fault of the West. I mean, I don't want to now go back deeply into this issue, but I think the way out of all of this is cooperation, is exactly what China is proposing. So I think the Europeans should be very happy about what China is doing.
Yeah, Hongjian, of course, come back to this China-European or China, France-Germany ties. Here, as Premier Li is in France now, and speaking to French business leaders, he talked about, interdependence is an inevitable result of economic globalization, and the sound political mutual trust between China and France enables the two countries to see stability, certainty, and common development opportunities in their interdependence rather than risks. And according to the data from China's Commerce Ministry, French investment in China during these first 5 months of this year increased by 429.7%. I mean, this figure says a lot about this relationship, probably on the firmer ground in terms of the bilateral ties. Is that the case?
Yes, also, always, I think this economic cooperation, including the trade, investment, and even now, the industry cooperation, certainly a very, very fundamental and substantial basis for this cooperation between China and France, and also between China and Europe at large. Also, in the past, it looks like Germany played a major role to develop its cooperation economically with China on European side. But in recent years, also the France and also some other countries, they also become more and more important because, as we know now, there's a little bit of difficult or kind of a dilemma for some European business or enterprises. On one side, yes, they do have a good cooperation with the United States, with American enterprises. But now the Biden administration is imposing some, as we know, that unilateral measures, including the IRA or some other, actions to protect so-called American interests. And on this regard, once there are some maybe suspicions from French or European companies towards China, but if you take a comparison between United States and China, especially the policies, you can find that so far still, the China would be the biggest and also the most attractive destination of investment, and also the more favorable market for most of French enterprises and investors. Also, even regarding to this cooperation between China and France, both sides have some more ambitions, not only because of some traditional cooperation in, as we know, aviation and also high-speed railway, and also some, industry, and also from the President Macron and also President Xi, and they are high-level cooperation. Always they have some more, long-term plan for more cooperation. Mm-hmm. For example, agriculture and also some biologic and also medicine, some other. So I do believe that in the same direction of pushing forward this green economy and the digital economy, there will be some more and more potentials. For cooperation between China and France.
China and France. Okay, at the same time, Premier Li's trip coincided with the summit hosted by France, Professor Toker, which is called a New Global Financing Pact. The summit will touch upon, topics like climate change, energy, public health, and how to deal with a potential economic crisis. Some analysts view this as France's efforts to push greater multipolarization around the world. So France is for probably an new emerging world of multipolarity?
I would perhaps prefer the term of multilateralism than multipolarization in order to define the kind of efforts and the kind of ambitions the French have traditionally being supportive of for a very long time, well beyond our present situation and over several decades, which, by the way, is a position the Chinese diplomacy and strategy had been advocating for a very long time too, and have proven actually to work in this direction over 5 continents. So yes, those issues are extremely important, and as a matter of fact, they by themselves could be helpful in dealing with what I earlier called the elephant in the room, which is the issue which is very dominant on European minds and on Western minds these days, which is the war. I mean, working on world climate, which of course cannot be solved by individual countries or individual continents, or working on long-range issues which are related with development, with energies, with new types of economies which are awaiting us in the middle run and long run range, could be extremely helpful, especially perhaps if we're speaking about the perspective of those nations which are right now weaker than others on world economy. And this could be the major element which the summit in Paris, hosted also by UNESCO, could be helpful about. But under the condition that these will be in the service of solving the most important issue which is there on the agenda, and not as kind of replacement of this major issue.
Okay, multipolarism, multipolarity, or multilateralism. But when we are seeing more than one pose here, probably. Back to Germany. Before his trip to France, Helga, of course, the premier spent a couple of days in Germany. So before his arrival, German side published its first national security strategy, in which they mentioned, China relationship. They described China as a partner, competitor, and a systemic rival. So, for Chinese people, we don't see like France or Germany as in any sense as a rival or systematic rival or competitor. Tell us, in which area Germany is competing with China, or in which area, in what way China is seen as a systemic rival?
Well, I think, unfortunately, this national security strategy paper, in my view, reflects more the American pressure on Germany right now rather than German interest. Because, I've been in China many times, more recently about 2 weeks ago, and I cannot find anything in Chinese policy which would be a threat or even a systemic rival to Germany, not to the real Germany. It only is regarded as a systemic threat if you think that there is a competition between the neoliberal system and the other economic system which China has developed, with especially the 40 years of opening up and reform, the Belt and Road Initiative, and now the Global Development Initiative. That is a different model of economics, but that is not a threat and should not be seen as a threat, because from the Chinese side, it is always open. It's a win-win offer. Germany is welcome to cooperate with China, not only on bilateral issues, investments in China and investments in Germany, but especially joint ventures in third countries. In my view, if Germany would be smart, they would recognize that a whole new system is emerging, where the Belt and Road Initiative, which has now its 10th anniversary, has changed the hope of the global South countries tremendously. They now feel much more empowered. They feel that they can overcome poverty and underdevelopment with the help of the Belt and Road projects. And for Germany, which is a highly export-depending countries, the future must lie with the global South. So for Germany to think China is a rival is stupid. It's not true. From the Chinese side, there is no such thing. And, the only reason why a national security paper would say something like that is because Germany, unfortunately, has lost a lot of its sovereignty right now. And in a certain sense, the EU is not helpful, because the EU is echoing the American and the British voices much stronger. So in that sense, I was happy about the visit of Prime Minister Li now, because that has asserted a certain amount of sovereignty on the side of Germany in terms of its economic interest. And I think this is the reflection of the major industrial firms, which some were visited also in the context of this trip, because they know that, Germany right now not to cooperate with China after the relationship with Russia has been completely cut, would almost be suicide. And with China, Germany has a wonderful future. We can develop together Africa, we can develop together much of Latin America, the global South countries. And, I'm actually very hopeful that if we get over this present crisis, which is a very severe one, then, I think we enter a new era of mankind, which, President Xi Jinping always talks about changes which have not taken place since 100 years. I would even say longer. What is ending now is the period of 500 years or 600 years of colonialism, because the countries of the global South really do not want to be put in the box of colonial systems anymore, which continue to exist despite the formal independence. And now with the help of China, they are developing a completely new sense of sovereignty, sense of identity, and they want to become middle-class countries as quickly as possible. Now that means for Germany, for example, tons of export markets, billions of people need German exports. And if there would be a synergy between China and Germany in this respect, it can be only beneficial for both.
Yes. Professor Toker, Premier Li Qiang said during his stay in Germany that, the biggest risk is the lack of cooperation, and the biggest hidden security danger is the lack of development. Given the situation in Germany, in the European Union, for example, in Germany, the recession or soft recession is here. Probably the economy will stay weak for some time. Development and cooperation with big economies like China, like the US, and like other players are important, right?
Obviously, cooperation is a great thing. Development is useful and necessary, and trying to get out of an economic crisis due to cooperation with the other side of the world is extremely positive. But I cannot not take an issue with what my colleague in Berlin just expressed. You cannot detach the economic situation of Germany, or for that matter any other EU member, let it be France or Austria or Belgium or Italy or Spain. You cannot detach it. You cannot cut it away from the overall geostrategic situation. Western Europe and North America are linked to each other for 3 generations now in terms of security, sovereignty, common values, appreciation of democracy, emphasis on human rights, and elements which are well stronger on the medium and long run than just the calculations, however important they may be, regarding growth and progress over economic issues. And these issues have not become weaker these days. They have become stronger these days because of what's happening on the central eastern side of Europe, namely in Ukraine. Now, of course, forces within the German scene can express ideas which may be similar to what my colleague just said in terms of finding solution to where Germany right now stands. But it cannot be done as a replacement of the overall deep, although problematic, alliance between Western Europe and the US. So it would not be helpful to keep away those issues and say, let's solve all the others.
We have to stop there, Professor.
Let's work on energy.
Obviously, there are different opinions over there. With that, we come to the end for today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on our YouTube. Thank you for being with us. I'm Xu Xinduo. See you next time.